We have Grace Corbin, the Vice President of the Board of Directors and Marketing Coordinator with Casa Nueva Restaurant and Cantina. Grace has been with Casa Nueva since 2011 and is currently serving her second term as the Board of Directors Vice President. She is active in the front of house and operations committees and can often be found hosting on weekend nights, seating customers, and managing Casa's reservations and wait list. So thanks, Grace, for joining us today. We also have Josh Brown, who is the live entertainment booking coordinator, also with Casa Nueva Restaurant and Cantina. And Josh has been a part of Casa Nueva since 1996 and has served on the board of directors as president for a significant portion of that time. He also serves as Casa's live entertainment booking coordinator and runs sound for the live shows. He can be found behind the bar, crafting cocktails and chatting with his regular customers. Thanks, Josh, for joining us. Great to have you both. We'd also like to introduce our West Virginia folks. Mavery Davis is a CPA and Director of Lending and New Economy Works of West Virginia. Born in Los Angeles, California, Mavery moved to West Virginia on a football scholarship. Although a scholarship did not fully materialize, Mavery remained in West Virginia, completed his degree, and has a career filled with ups and downs, as he candidly shares. And I'm sure we'll get to hear about that soon. Mavery is a certified public accountant, breaking the chains of poverty and creating wealth. He is a CPA by day, serving as Director of Lending for New Economy Works West Virginia Seed Commons, and a community organizer, a motivator, and a financial literacy boot camp founder by night. Through the FLBC, he teaches youth the psychology of money and financial basics. Through these efforts, he plants the seeds of collective community wealth and abundance. Mavery's earned the Hubert Henderson Office of Minority Affairs Trailblazer Pioneer Award in 2020. In addition to his professional accountant certification, Mavery also holds a Bachelor of Science degree with a concentration in accounting from West Virginia State University and a Master of Science degree with a concentration in public accounting from Strayer University. Additionally, Mavery is an adjunct professor of accounting at WVSU, a guest teacher at Make Shop Design Lab, a National Society of Black Certified Public Accountants board member, and a collaborator in all things workshops. Mavery has been recognized as a top 40 under 40 Black CPA by the NSBCPA in 2021 and a hometown hero by West Virginia Can't Wait in 2022. In his current role as the Director of Lending for New Economy Works West Virginia, he brings a passion for uplifting people and connecting them to the resources they need along their cooperative business journey. And I'm so glad to see that Octavia was able to join us today as well. And Octavia, I will let you introduce yourself since we were unsure. I don't have your bio here, but we'll let you introduce yourself.
Well, I was gonna say, do you guys have time after that with Mavery? Because that's pretty long. But I'm just Octavia Cordon. I am a working cooperative business owner here in Charleston, West Virginia, with my family, my husband, and my daughter. We opened a restaurant about a little under 3 years ago. So we're still in the beginning phases, working in the co-ops sector. My background is in education. I have my doctorate in education with specialization in curriculum and instruction. And I'm originally from New York. I have 4 beautiful children, and just happy to be here today to share and learn with you guys.
Well, thank you so much, Octavia, for being with us today, and congratulations on your business ownership journey. That's pretty exciting to be almost at the 3-year mark. So thank you so much for joining us.
And Hannah, you've been in the conversation about Fat Daddies from the beginning, because you were some of the first guidance that we got, like, on moving the project forward. I don't know if people know that, but you were.
Well, I'm so glad that you guys have made such awesome progress, and happy to be a small part of that help. It takes a village for sure. So we're going to talk about that today. So I'm so excited to have all of you with us. This panel is an amazing source of expertise. So we're going to spend as much time as we can in dialogue with one another, learning about really how worker cooperatives work, and particularly in our context here in the Appalachian region. There is really exciting activity. There are, of course, challenges and hurdles, and part of what we're here to do today is just to learn from each other. So I do want to reiterate Melissa's encouragement for folks to ask questions. I have the chat in front of me. So excited to have folks with us today with various levels of experience. So thank you so much for joining us. And if you're just joining us, welcome. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I'm going to share a little bit of information and then ask questions, but at any point, please put your questions in the chat. And then I'd also encourage Grace and Josh and Mavery and Octavia, if you want to ask questions of one another, feel free as well. So we're all about the dialogue this morning. So I just want to kind of set a little bit of context for why we're here this morning, what we're talking about. Melissa shared the Appalachia Cooperates Initiative. We're going to talk about one type of employee ownership, specifically in our context here in Appalachia. We're going to talk about worker cooperatives. We'll spend a little bit of time defining that. I do just want to acknowledge that there are other ways of doing employee ownership here in the United States. For example, employee stock ownership plans, ESOPs, are a qualified retirement plan, essentially, where a trust owns stock in a business. They're actually one of the most popular forms of employee ownership across the United States. And they have varying levels of complexity and ability in terms of worker governance. Employee ownership trusts are also another method of doing employee ownership. They're less common in the United States than they are in Europe. They're much more developed in Europe. Again, a trust owns the company on behalf of its worker owners, and that facilitates the ability for democratic decision-making among those workers if they choose. But let's jump into what a worker cooperative is just very briefly, and then we're going to jump into questions and discussion with our panelists. So a worker cooperative, very basically, sometimes there's a little bit of, I think, opportunity for us to parse out the definition of a worker cooperative, because I have a colleague who used to say, if you've seen one co-op, you've seen one co-op, because they're all different and responsive to their members. So I hope we're going to see some of that today. But just to help us set the foundation, worker cooperatives are businesses where worker owners own most of the equity, sometimes all of the equity, and control the voting shares of the business while they participate in profit sharing. We're going to talk about that, oversight, and in some cases, management. We'll talk more about that, while operating by democratic cooperative principles. Those principles on the next slide are shared globally. They are fostered by multiple organizations. The principles that I'm showing here are fostered by the International Cooperative Alliance. And this set of principles really unites cooperatives of all kinds. Worker cooperatives also sometimes operate using the Mondragon cooperative principles, which are very similar to this as well. Some of those that I want to highlight for us here are democratic member control. That's one of the principles that the ICA, when they survey cooperators globally, the data shows that cooperators cite that as the most important cooperative principle, democratic member control. We also see various other really important principles that we're going to talk about today, like member economic participation, education, training, and information, what we're doing here, concern for community, and we could go on. So I want to pause there, and I'd like to ask, we're gonna do a little bit more work thinking about the context of the cooperative landscape, but I'd like to ask, I'd like to start with Grace and Josh, if you could, please. Casa, Nueva Restaurant and Cantina have a long history in Athens, Ohio as a worker cooperative. I'd like if you could briefly just share the story of Casa and describe your business as it looks today. That's no small task there, so thank you.
Well, briefly, yeah, so in 1985, it was known as Casa at the time, and the owner split town, and so the workers banded together and found out a way to make it a co-op so that they could maintain employment for one, and also, yeah, I mean, I guess that was primarily it, and became a co-op at that point. Briefly.
Awesome. And that was, I'm sure that process was more complex than we get to hear in that. Could you share a little bit about what the business looks like today? What do you do today?
So we have more than 15, less than 20 members right now, worker owners. We have at least one trial member. And the reason that I don't know that number pinned down directly is because it is a little bit fluid, because we have people come and go. I could have, and then we have about, let's see if we've got between like 35 and 40 employees, so associates, so workers that are non-owners. So that is complicated and confusing and fun. And we have worker owners who are coordinators and board members, but we also have associates who are able to be coordinators also. And that sort of came out of the need of wanting associates to be able to participate more in the governance and day-to-day operations, as well as just the need for more people who are willing to be in those positions. So that's sort of where we are now. We have not always opened up coordinator positions to associates. So that's sort of a development over the past, I don't know, 5 or 8 years or something like that.
Okay, excellent. We're going to talk more about governance as well. Octavia, could you share a little bit about your business? Just tell us a little bit about that journey, and maybe a little bit about why you decided to use the worker cooperative model. What was some of the motivation there?
Well, one of the biggest things that attracted me to the cooperative model is the equal, the fairness between members, And although we started out, of course, like I said, with myself, my husband, and my daughter, you would think it would be easy because, hey, we're family, we're all gonna get along, everything is gonna go right, but that's not the case all the time. So, we have differences in opinions and stuff like that. So, but the cooperative principles help guide us, to kind of see what that should look like. And, every day we're still trying to model that, as we still build up the business and also the behind the scenes stuff, because like I said, we're just 3 years in, we learn something new every day. So, we just try to apply everything that we're learning about the co-op process, and we try to, pour that back into the structure, which we're still building, because we want to make sure that we do have a streamlined process. So when we do invite new people in, like Ms. Grace was talking about, we want to make sure all those ducks, are in a row, so that way it's a very clear process for people that's coming in, and then it will help us to internalize what we actually need, because not everybody's a good fit for co-op. That's what I'm saying. So we started out, like I said, less than 3 years ago, it was just 5 of us, 3 worker owners, and also 2, regular employees who are currently right now on track to becoming full members. So today we do have 22 employees total, so because we definitely grew, within that short time period. So, but I think like I said, the biggest thing is being able to have that shared ownership, and also everybody have that equal say into what's going to contribute to the growth and the success of the business. And you don't always see that every day, in a big chain, because their goal is profit, and who gets the big bucks, the people that's sitting in office. So, but it just it's just kind of like what we do already. We try to work together, working on community, and all the principles kind of align with the stuff that we were already doing within our community, and also how we live our lives as a family. So
Excellent. Well, congratulations on that growth. That's a really exciting. Mavery, you have a unique perspective as a cooperative developer as well. I was wondering if you'd like to add anything about, when folks are talking to you about exploring the worker cooperative model, what kind of motivations are you hearing, or what kind of motivations do you talk with folks about?
I don't know. This is, I'm I mean, it's the same motivations that we've heard from Octavia and from Grace, right? Is people want an opportunity to do something different, to have meaningful work, right? To have fair, to have a say in whether or not they get to work during COVID, or if that's somebody else's decision to make, right? And then it's like lack of access to support and planning their business, right? A lot of times people don't know what they don't know. And Fat Daddies is a really special story to me because we had something that I think is hard to come by, which is we had a lot of trust. We say in Seed Commons all the time, co-op development moves at the speed of trust. And what we had best in our back pocket was that Octavia, myself, others in the community, we had already been organizing, and whether it's around voting or whatever, we were in the community trying to figure out how to make life better for ourselves and the people around us. And so when they were presented with the opportunity to attract business capital, but they had to become a worker co-op, they're like, what's a worker co-op? But because we had trust, and I'm making a point here, I guess, but because we had trust amongst each other, even though there was a lot of gray areas in doing that business planning process, it took us a year before Fat Daddy's got his first penny. And if we didn't have that trust at the back of it, at the foundation of that, every time I came back to Octavia and the team with a no, or with, well, we got to try something else, or, well, this isn't, we need more information on that. It didn't turn into arguments, or it didn't turn into finger pointing and things like that, because we had a level of trust with each other already. So when things didn't go the way we had hoped or maybe expected, I don't know, we were able to still come to the table and work together, because we knew at the core of it, we had each other's best interests at heart. And that I wasn't saying no, or they weren't getting a no for the financing because we didn't like them, that the business plan didn't work or whatever. It was just we didn't know what we didn't know yet, and we had to keep coming back to the table to work it. So yeah, cooperatives move at the speed of trust, and that's hard to build, but we were lucky to have it in our situation.
That is such a helpful reminder, Mavery, and I'm going to start using that phrase. Cooperatives develop at the speed of trust. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, Grace says she's writing it down too. I think that's really important to remember. And I wanted to ask Grace and Josh, one of the things that I have always seen about Casa Nueva, and I think many people see Casa Nueva from the outside and their kind of embeddedness in the community. And so I was wondering if you could share maybe an example or two of the way that Casa Nueva, as Mavery was sharing that embeddedness in the community as a catalyst for Fat Daddies, could you share maybe an example or two of Casa Nueva's embeddedness in the community as a way to kind of share with us some of those cooperative principles as well?
So one big one that is, so we're a restaurant, right? And normally restaurants accept tips. And we don't accept tips and have not since 2012, because in 2012, there were intricacies within the FLSA that didn't allow for the way that we were pooling and distributing tips. We were working within the spirit of the law, but not to the letter of the law. And so rather than make things inequitable amongst our staff in terms of a tip pool or not, we decided to stop taking tips, but then became the obvious question of what do we do with the money that inevitably people will leave behind, either because they forgot that we don't take tips or they're intending to leave a tip or whatever. So we decided to each month aggregate and distribute those funds to a different nonprofit in our community every month. So the way that we describe it now, a lot of the organizations that we choose like to promote the fact that any money that's left behind during any given month goes directly to them. We avoid the word tips altogether because a lot of times I'll want to say all the worker owners are donating their tips, but that's really not what it is. It's a customer donation. So there's often the question of, did this customer leave this money on purpose for this organization, or did they mean it as a tip? But either way, we aggregate and distribute that money each month. So that's a really interesting way that we work with different organizations and raise awareness for different nonprofit organizations in our community, whether they're related to the local food scene or not.
Right.
It's a lot of like environmental organizations and philanthropic organizations.
And it's even gotten to the point where customers seek out to find out who the donation of the month is.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, I really like them. And they'll leave extra money at the end on purpose. So we are sort of recycling money into the community through that program, which is really nice.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that example. That's a really neat way to take something that could be kind of a downer and turn it into a neat opportunity to help your community. So I appreciate that. If you're not familiar with the Democracy at Work Institute, DAWI, they and partners, for example, have a regular survey of worker cooperative businesses across the United States. That's one of the sources that we use to better understand this ecosystem and landscape. They, in their last survey, estimated that there are about 612 democratic workplaces, so worker cooperatives, in the US, employing about 6,000 workers. And generally speaking, these businesses are smaller, with a median of 6 workers. We heard both from Casa and from Fat Daddies that you're probably above that median size, or you are above that median size for sure. And we can see that median revenue right around $300,000. And although we have 2 restaurants with us today, I do want to point out that worker cooperatives are in lots of different sectors. So childcare, home care, professional services, manufacturing, we see them all across the economic landscape. And, you know, people point to various benefits of the worker cooperative model. One of those that we heard from Mavery a little bit is stability, right? Workplace stability. For example, worker cooperatives prioritizing labor. One of the Mondragon cooperative principles, of course, is the subordination of capital to labor. So we see that some bear out, for example, in the average wage that worker cooperatives pay to their workers. And this was in 2018, almost $20 an hour average wage. And one of the really important ways that worker cooperatives distribute benefits, of course, is by paying patronage. And in 2018, that average patronage distribution or profit distribution was $8,200. So I just want to kind of help us set up our foundation that way as well. And I was hoping, Mavery, if you could share with us, you know, as somebody who helps support the development of new cooperatives, new worker cooperatives, and particularly thinking from the financial space, you know, we know, for example, from this same data that about 50% of worker cooperatives say that financing growth is a challenge. Similar metrics for saying that business planning is a challenge. From your perspective, could you share with us maybe why you feel like business planning and financing are a challenge for worker cooperatives, and what are some of the resources or ways that we as a community can help mitigate those challenges?
Okay, so I was literally just talking about this last night, because they're both of those aspects you just mentioned, right? The business planning and the financing are closely tied together. You literally can't have one without the other, you know. And business planning in and of itself is a challenge, and it takes time, right? It takes time to put together a cohesive business plan. And then a lot of financing has like all these metrics and things and boxes people have to check. And the financing is often not as patient as the business needs to have it in order to get all their ducks in a row in a way that can communicate why they need the money, right? And so, that's just one of they're just closely intertwined. And to my point earlier, a lot of times these businesses don't know what they don't know, right? And then when they start going after financing, I see a lot of people, businesses, they start going after these big like funding opportunities. Maybe they're big grants, maybe they're trying to get a loan. And the reality is, in order to actually put together a cohesive business plan, and we're talking about startups here, right? Like people who are starting out, you really need to put together a series of smaller applications and things that give you a chance to really, like, that's part of the business planning process. I didn't know it at the time until like me and Octavia are doing it, but it's like, you know, those smaller grants or like there was this one grant we applied for, which we got denied for 3 times, but going through that helped us to better explain what we were doing and how we were doing it and what the finance needs were. When we went back after those denials to CE Commons, we had a better proposal and a better understanding and some more evidence that, hey, we're facing all these barriers with access to capital, you know what I mean? But putting together those smaller, more focused projects helped us to really tease out exactly where the business was and what type of loan we should be asking for at what juncture we were at, right? So and most financing is not patient enough to work with people that way. So I'll stop there, and then I do have some other, I guess, insight on, I guess, what we do to support businesses along the way.
I'm so excited to hear that. We're going to come back to that. So how we can support businesses using that approach, Mavery, that you're talking about, that's super important, that phased kind of deliberate approach, right? In a way that works through that process. I want to share with folks too, if you have not seen some of the work from Hillary Abel and Melissa Hoover in the worker cooperative space, understanding the ecosystems that support worker cooperative development across the United States. You know, they looked at where worker cooperatives kind of are clustered in the United States. In Ohio is one of those cluster areas, so we're really lucky that way. But they cite that some of those essential elements for developing an ecosystem where worker cooperatives can thrive are just what Mavery is talking about: technical assistance and financing, right? And helping folks build their skills and capacity, right? And be ready for growth. And so, of course, there are various other elements, but they actually cite those as the essential ones, right? Saying that these elements in this space and these geographies have been essential to helping worker cooperatives grow. And so I'd like to ask Octavia if you would add anything to kind of that business planning process. What are some of the tips that you would offer someone who's thinking about a worker cooperative regarding that process? Like, what would you say about the business planning process to somebody who's just thinking about starting out?
See, we were kind of like a worker in progress, you know, like we learned a lot of stuff along the way. And one of my biggest recommendations to anyone considering it, of course, is to go through the principles, you know, I call it the Bible now, you know, the co-op Bible. Go through the principles and make sure that it aligns with what you're trying to do and your way of thinking and, you know, the way you do things, you know, because everybody do things totally different. And then you get boxed into this, you know, and now, you know, everybody has a different mindset. Everybody still hasn't really fully adapted to the way, you know, this is designed. So if you're not, and you still have people on the fence and they're not really fully putting in what they need to put into, to be a cooperative member. So now you done wasted a lot of time, you know, on people that's not gonna be a good fit. So I definitely recommend, like I said, going through that, learn as much as you can about the process, about the principles, everything you can to see if that's something that's gonna work with what you're doing and the work culture that you have, basically. Because like I said, we're learning stuff daily. Like I go to conferences, webinars, workshops, blah, blah, blah. Mavery keeps me busy. So definitely. So, you know, I went to Puerto Rico. We, you know, went to a conference out there. I didn't even realize how much history was out there with co-ops. Like it was beautiful, you know, so it's a lot to learn. It's a lot of information to swallow. And you're not going to just swallow that in 1 year. You know, it's going to take time. You got to digest it. And like I said, you got to make sure that it can adapt to, you know, the way that you're doing things or the way you envision your business, you know, because maybe not all businesses fit into that model, you know. So that's my recommendations, is just learn as much as you can. And that's what we did, you know, because like he said, when he approached us, we didn't know anything. We knew we wanted to start a business. We were going to start a business, you know, but we had zero knowledge of cooperatives. And, you know, along the way, we were just digesting a little bit at a time, just digesting it and still trying to figure out the plan. You know, we're still building the plan. We're still trying to put all this together. And that in itself is a lot, you know, to digest and continue to move forward. So sometimes it was like, some days we were like, man, you know what, I don't know, you know, if we want to even move forward, because it was still hard, and it was during COVID, you know, everything's closing down and we're sitting here trying to open up a co-op, you know, so. But it took trust, you know, like he said, it took trust and it took patience and it took a lot of sacrifices, you know, so.
And the only thing I would add to that is during those times, you know, what you want to find in a developer is that they're showing up good or bad, no matter what. Like, no matter what the outlook was, you know, I was answering the phone, I was over at the old spot, you know, I was on the phone with Octavia. We cried together sometimes, you know, and, you know, I remember this one time very vividly, new Fat Daddies needed the loan we were asking for really bad. We had just got denied the second time for this smaller $10,000 grant, and we had put all this effort into this funding proposal. And we went to City Commons, and they told us no. And you know, I cried on that call, and I went to Octavia, and I was probably crying then. I was like, we didn't get it, you know. But here's why: we're not asking for enough money. We haven't addressed what people's wages are going to be. We were trying to bootstrap it in our proposal, you know. So being able to go back and have those conversations, even though, you know, there was some level of embarrassment or feeling like I failed, where, you know, internally my ego is telling me I can't go have that conversation with them. Like, I didn't do the thing right. We didn't do the thing right. How do I say this? But the trust we had at our foundation was that I knew no matter what the response was, when I finally really had the real conversation with myself, you know what, Octavia, Cam, Ajale, they're still gonna love me, they're still gonna trust me, no matter, even though I got this bad news, right? And we gotta be able to work, like I gotta have to be able to communicate to them the reasons I learned why we didn't get approved. And I can't get stuck in the fact that I'm worried about somebody not trusting me or you know, worried about the relationship and things like, or not coming through, right? You know, because a lot of times we get transactional with things, and if a transaction doesn't go through, then it messes up our relationship, right? But we were able to have enough trust to, as we're going through all those things, that we knew we had to keep coming back to the table, because we were the only ones that were going to be able to figure this out. Nobody else was going to figure it out but us coming to the table together to see what the real needs were.
And I will quickly add, Hannah, just really quickly, just because I was getting ready to say member dynamics is very important. So I would, you know, back to me saying, do as much research as you can about the process so you can understand what the expectations are. And one thing Mavery always told me was, it's not a no, it's a not yet. And that gave me hope, you know what I'm saying? So that was just something that kept me going, to know there was still work that needed to be done. Like, we're not there yet, you know, it's not a no, but it's a not yet. So that just reassured us that we needed to do a lot more stuff. We had more work to do. We had more planning to do. We had more learning to do. So that pretty much gave me hope. That just popped in my head.
Thank you for sharing. And it's important to recognize, first of all, the importance of that trust again, and that this is a process, and part of the learning is the process, right? And so, you know, I have had conversations before where folks talk about like, oh, we can get a business plan written for us, or if we could get this done. You know, part of the importance is the process. So it's really interesting to hear that. And Grace and Josh had heard you guys speak before too, even as a mature cooperative, about the importance of member dynamics and trust building and having difficult conversations. I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about the work that you do ongoing to make sure that you are working cohesively as a group of shared owners.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely been challenging. The co-ops have definitely an upside, and the upside to it is that you have lots of brains trying to solve a problem, which is very helpful. The downside of that is that it takes time. A single owner could make a decision in a day and have something in motion, whereas for us, it's usually a matter of months before something actually gets done of any significance. It's also been challenging over COVID as well. I do want to mention that I'm really impressed with you guys that you were able to actually open up a business during COVID, because we struggled very much during COVID financially, and we still really haven't 100% recovered yet. But again, one of the advantages of being in a work co-op is there's lots of brains getting together to try to solve that problem and get back on track.
Yeah. Again, congratulations to Fat Daddies for that.
We're very impressed.
Yeah. Part of this kind of trust and having the importance of communication is we have a colleague in the cooperative space. I've heard Courtney Berner at the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives say that you know, shared decision-making, shared governance is both the superpower and the Achilles heel of cooperatives, right? It is both one of the things that makes them the most unique and powerful, but it is also hard. And Josh, you alluded to that in terms of time as well. So I was wondering, first I wanted to kind of set the stage with folks that decision-making models, again, remember, if you've seen one co-op, you've seen one co-op. This is especially true, I think, in decision-making models or in shared governance. Some cooperatives, particularly in the worker space, use collective models where all members are engaged in governance at some level in that decision-making, and management happens among all members via, you know, sometimes that's via committees or other structures, and then workers are accountable to all of those members. In a representative model, that governance happens by an elected board that is comprised of members and elected by those members. And then the cooperative is managed by, you know, maybe a single manager. Sometimes you can see mixed hybrid models, for example, where that might not be the case. But the management happens with a hired manager who is accountable to the board of directors. And then workers are accountable to the management through that organizational structure. Again, there are lots of different variations of this. And so one of the things I think is most interesting is to ask worker cooperatives, like, how do you make decisions together? How would you describe your governance model? So Grace and Josh, if you would start out, I'd love to hear more about your governance model. And then Octavia, we'd love to hear about how Fat Daddies does shared decision-making. So Grace, you want to kick it off?
Sure. So we have a board of directors and we meet weekly and talk mostly about big pictures type things We're working very much right now on wage restructuring, which will affect all of our workers, both owners and associates. But we're sort of a hybrid between these two models because we don't have a manager, but there are definitely worker owners that are much more involved in decision making at all levels than other worker owners. Some worker owners, it seems, have kind of withdrawn a little bit, maybe since COVID, maybe from burnout, frankly. But there are some people that attend every meeting, give lots of input at every meeting, walk away with next steps and task delegation, and then come back to the next meeting having fulfilled those tasks and next steps. And then there are some that don't. And we just have to be okay with both. You know, sometimes quite, like, I get annoyed a little bit when I'm like, oh my gosh, take a step back. Like, you don't need to be involved with everything. But then, like Josh said, the more people thinking about the different issues and things that we need to get done in some ways, the better. Although then there's, of course, the time. The other thing that I wanted to say too is that something that Mavery brought up is you don't know what you don't know. And one thing that has helped me so much in my role as marketing coordinator, so communicating a lot with the public, is that explaining the way that we do things very much helps me understand the way that we do things. And that's been a huge part of learning what this place is really all about. Because if I just got back from traveling with some friends and I was explaining some of our complicated financial ins and outs and explaining it to him, and he was like, wait, what? That doesn't make sense. And I was like, wait, let me explain it again. And then I did, and then he was like, that still doesn't make sense. And I was like, well, maybe I don't know some of, everything I think I know. So that is so, so true.
And I would also say, yeah, if we were taking a look at these two models, I would say we're pretty much a hybrid of the two. Definitely at the end of the day, per se, we are a collective where we're governed by all members. But when we're actively trying to do whatever task X, Y, or Z
in practice,
we're more representatives. But the buck stops at membership, for sure. So everyone is sort of responsible for the overall health of the business. Although there are those of us, like Grace said, that are doing it day to day to make sure it happens.
Yeah, and this diagram is, I think, somewhat of a, I want to recognize that it's a little bit of an academic exercise to like categorize these things, because in the real world, it's like, it's a mashup of kind of what you find works and kind of where you've been and where you want to go. So totally fair to describe that as a hybrid, I think. Octavia, you want to share how you guys do shared decision making for Fat Daddies?
Definitely a little bit of both, but it's more on the collective side, like the gentleman just mentioned. And the only reason I pull in this part is because we can't forget each member's gift, like what they're good at, because everybody has a specific task or specialized skill that they have. So then that's where you get this part from, the representative. That's where that come in at. So I say, like myself, for example, there's certain things that although I'm a worker owner or worker member, there's specific things and tasks that that I do that I was singled out to only handle, so HR, for example, so that's something I focus on entirely, and payroll, that's something I focus on entirely. So I definitely see us, moving within both of these, but we do have more on the collective side, to say the least. So.
And we're working with the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops currently through their co-op clinic program to help Fat Daddies figure all that out in a way that works for Fat Daddies.
Right.
Right. Right. And that's part of what I want to point out too is, again, cooperatives are responsive to their members. And so there is a lot of fluidity and flexibility in how decisions get made or can be. So one of the things that, we do when we're thinking about cooperative development very early on is helping folks think through how do you want to make decisions together? Regardless of, I mean, this is true in all kinds of cooperatives, whether it's a worker cooperative or a producer cooperative or any kind. How is it you want to make decisions together? And let's work through that so that it meets these values and principles that are why you have chosen this model in the first place, in a lot of cases. Yeah. Excellent. I wanted to circle back to both Grace and Octavia referenced. I think sometimes there's this myth in worker cooperatives that everybody who works at the business is also an owner. And you both referenced the fact that that's not true. So I was hoping that each of you could share briefly how it is you bring in new member owners. Like, what's that process look like for you? And Octavia, I think you maybe had mentioned you're still kind of figuring that out. So if you just want to share to the extent that you're comfortable doing that, we'd love to hear that. I'll start with you, and then I'll ask Grace and Josh to share.
Yeah, really quickly, like you just mentioned, we're still trying to see how we want that to look. So, but overall, I did mention earlier that we have two persons that started with us, from the beginning. So they're in transition. They're kind of, working on learning all the, the principles and stuff like that, all that good stuff that we had to sit through. So they're working through that stuff now. But ultimately, we would like to see, a worker be here for a year at least, and then if it's their decision to pursue and want to learn more information about this process and, be able to continue on with us, then we'll, make a collective vote amongst ourselves. Because like I said, everybody's not collective material. So, but we want to, that's what we're trying to design now. We want to have a process, a streamlined process, so we can know how that looks. So going further, as we do, get people that may be interested, we have a process that we have them go through. But for right now, we're definitely wanting them to be with us for at least 1 year. And
Great.
then, then we'll offer an invitation, like I said, and we'll come together and make a collective vote on that.
Yeah. Grace, I know that at Casa you guys have had the time to develop this system out. So what's that look like for you?
So yeah, it's not surprising, but you never really know who gets a job here that's going to want to go all in or isn't. And either one is okay, although, we want to encourage participation. But ours is sort of similar. It's similar in that we have like a threshold of time that we want you to be here before you trust us and before we trust you. So for us, it's 1,000 hours. And there is an application process that can be lengthy, but we've been around for so long and our systems are so, we're big and our systems are complicated and intertwined such that there's a lot to learn basically. So you apply to become a worker owner and we put you into a trial phase, and then you go through one of every single committee meeting. You go through financial workshops with our personnel and general ledger finance coordinators. You go through some HR workshops and you learn all of the intertwined ways in which this business functions or doesn't sometimes. And then you go through another application process to become a full member. And it's very rare that someone doesn't make it through. But sometimes during that trial process, we might decide it's not a good fit, or you might decide it's not a good fit. And either of those is fine. It's just that's what the trial phase is for.
And I'd like to
go ahead, Josh.
Give a little backstory to that too, real quick. Just that, so from 1985 to 2000, Casa was 100% worker owned. There were no employees. When you applied to get a job here, you went through a 9-month trial process, and at the end of it, either you had a job or you didn't have a job. The reason that we switched away from that in 2000 is we were growing so fast at the time that we had over 50 members. Wow. And it was getting a little unwieldy to make decisions sometimes. And also there were certain people that really just wanted to show up and work their shift and go home. They didn't want to sit around and make these hard decisions. So we thought it was a good idea to go ahead and have what we call associates, which basically are employees, with mixed results. Sometimes I wish we could go back to 100% worker owned because that means that people are more invested when they're here. But at the same time, again, when I was talking about the decision-making process, the time to really solve these problems was becoming very lengthy.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting that you have had both experiences, so, and can kind of compare and contrast those. Thanks for sharing that. Unfortunately, we are out of time together this afternoon. I want to respect everybody's time and taking time away from your businesses. So I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for taking time to be with us this afternoon and for sharing your experiences, and also congratulations on being worker owners in some pretty cool businesses here in our region. So we really appreciate it.